Hi, you've reached the Central Baptist Church here, and we're getting ready for our session 3 of the Psalm 23 study. And this is Cal Lord, and I just want to remind you again that we are using the Right Now Media materials here, and you can see this is Psalm 23. If you go to Right Now Media and you sign in, and if you don't have the sign-in information, you can call church and we'll send you a link, and then look for the Central Baptist classes. And you'll see those on the left-hand column. Come down, click that, and then find Psalm 23 by Matt Chandler. These are the background materials, and it's some really great stuff to think about. So as we get ready to go into lesson 3, I encourage you to go to Right Now, and then watch this video, and then tune in to us. So today we're actually looking at the 3rd verse, but I'm going to read the whole thing and then just pause around the 3rd verse of the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures, and he leads me beside the still waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, and my cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We hear that psalm so often, and as I've said in the previous sessions, we don't necessarily slow it down and think about it when we read it or hear it. We just kind of go through the motions because it's so familiar, and we just sense that we understand it completely. I remember a few years back I had a funeral service, and it was for my brother-in-law, and when we were talking about the service, my niece said, I don't want the 23rd Psalm. Everybody has it, and it just doesn't mean anything to me. And we talked a little bit about that, and as I began to kind of break it down and explain a little bit of the deeper meaning behind it, she changed her mind, and she said, no, I think that would fit for my dad. I think we need to do that. And so today I want to just talk a little bit about the 3rd verse of this. And as we kind of get into the time we have together, I want to first ask you a question. I want you to think about a time when you broke the rules, maybe as a kid. And if it's a funny story about how maybe you got caught or what happened, even better. But what were the consequences of that? What happened afterwards? I always like to tell the story that when I was probably about 11 years old, 10 years old, I used to ride my bike into town, and I'd go into the grocery store. One day I went to the library. I love the library. I got a bunch of library books. I had a bag carrying them. I was going to ride my bike, carry them home. But before I did, I went into the grocery store, and I was just walking through the grocery store, and they had a section there with novelty ice creams where you can buy one at a time. And I remember I saw an ice cream sandwich there. And again, if you know me, you know ice cream is my Achilles heel. And I had money, but I don't know why, but I just reached in, I grabbed that ice cream, and I stuck it in my bag. And immediately I knew I was in trouble, because I looked down the end of the aisle, there was a man who saw me. And he just looked, and then he left. And a few moments later, somebody, probably a store manager or someone, came and took me in the back room. I was embarrassed. I was caught red-handed, and he said, what do you have in the bag? And I said, library books. Anything else? Yeah, an ice cream. And I went to get some money, and he said, he said, I know your parents. Now, I don't know if he did or not, but that was the thing that a lot of people said in those days, because small towns, people very often did. And I think it was the fact that he knew my parents more than anything else scared me to death. And so I want you to think about that, or maybe your experience of getting caught doing something when you broke the rules as a kid, or hopefully not too long ago, and keep that in the back of your mind about breaking the rules. In Psalm 23, 1-6. We've been talking about the relationship. It's an Old Testament passage, but Jesus kind of adopted it because in John chapter 10, he talks about being the good shepherd. And so it kind of reframes this whole thing in terms of God and Christ and how they are the shepherd. They are the ones who are taking care of us, who are looking after us, who know us, who want the very best for us. And so I want to just ask this question. When we get to this verse 3 and it talks about righteousness, paths of righteousness, I know I always get a little nervous because I know that I'm not perfect. Now some of you may think, well, gee, he's a pretty good guy and everything. Well, the truth is a lot of us could consider ourselves pretty good people. But when we begin to compare ourselves to the righteousness of God, we're like that little boy that I was who stole the ice cream. It doesn't seem like a big deal maybe, but it really strays from the path of what God calls us to be. And when you talk about righteousness in the scriptures, it's always compared with God's righteousness. The Hebrew term that David used to describe righteousness is zedek. In its most basic sense, the word refers to that which is right or upright. But in the context of Psalm 23, it carries a deeper sense. Certainly God cares for our physical well-being and often leads us along such paths. But he's far more concerned with the makeup of our hearts. The Zedek Daniel has in mind here concerns external health, but also internal salvation. So not only does he provide us a place among his flock and grant us the peace we need, but he also extends to us the salvation for the sake of his name, which is further made clear through the example of Jesus, who laid down his life for his sheep. Psalm 23 may be short, but it overflows with this concept of the generosity of this God in heaven. One of the things that the Bible makes very clear is that we cannot make ourselves righteous apart from God. It's all about God's grace. Matt Chandler, in the video that goes along with this study, pointed out in that session that the Israelites were a prime example of this. In the book of Exodus alone, God miraculously leads his people out of centuries of slavery in Egypt, allows them to cross the Red Sea on dry land, and provides them with manna from the sky to eat, only to hear them respond by pining and complaining for what they had back in Egypt. It didn't take long for them to forget their need for God. And it doesn't take long for us to. So often we are, Paul says it, we're like sheep and we so easily go astray. And so, again, a thing to think about is as you look back at your life and your relationship since you've come to know Jesus, how has God led you into paths of righteousness? And how has your life changed as a result of coming to know Christ? We had a man in my former church who used to talk about the fact that he used to swear and drink and he was your typical bad boy. And then something happened. He came to know Christ, and all of a sudden his life began to change. Now, he wasn't perfect. He always confessed he wasn't perfect. But when he talks about what happened, who he was before Christ and who he is after Christ, you can see there was a night and day change. And maybe for you or for me, we haven't had that kind of extreme change. But there have been some things that have changed in our life since we've known Christ. And I think it's because as we walk with Jesus, as we grow closer to him, as we get into his word, it does something within us. Not because we're doing something so great, but because we are with the shepherd. We begin a transformation process. You know, there's external things, but there's also the internal thing. You know, as a child, your parents will give you direction, tell you what to do, what not to do. Again, you can get in trouble because you don't obey the rules. But what God is really after is he's after the internal self, where something happens inside of us that changes, where all of a sudden we want to be more like Jesus. And the reason really is found in that John chapter 10, verse 11 to 18. Let me just read that passage because it says something that you need to remember. He says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. The sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Then the wolf attacks the flock and scatters it. The man runs away because he's a hired hand and cares nothing for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for my sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and the authority to take it up again. This command I received from my Father. 3 times, 4 times in this passage, Jesus says he lays down his life. And I think that's one of the keys. And if you have been for any period of time, that message keeps coming back. Like, we can't do it ourselves, but it is a power of Christ within us that allows us to do that. Here's a question that they ask in this study guide. What does verse 3 list as the reason for the Lord's shepherding care? Now, don't let the significance of this point pass you by. According to this verse, the reason God leads us into rest, leads us along the paths of righteousness, is for the glory of the world around us begins to notice it. And all those things that this psalm talks about become symbols of what the power of God, the love of God, the grace of God can do for a person in their life. Here's another question they kind of throw out at us, and you can, if you go back to the Matt Chandler side, they have a study guide, and you can download that, or you can open it up as a PDF on your computer. And some of those worries, some of those fears begin to disappear because we just say the Lord's will. He's going to take care of it. And again, it's interesting because I'm doing this weight loss program right now, noon, and they keep talking about mindfulness and thinking about what you're doing and whatnot. And this has been helpful for me even in my study of scriptures, because as I look at a passage, again, like the 23rd Psalm, and really slow it down and think about it, what does it mean to have the Lord as my shepherd? What does it mean to let him lead me? And what I find is that when I slow it down and think about it, the truth is that when I'm following God, there's a lot more peace in my life. Now, doesn't mean there won't be trials, but there's a peace because I'm not alone. He's with me. And so whatever I have to do, when I remember that he is with me and he's leading me and he's guiding me, then I know I can handle it. You know, there's an old expression, and people say it all the time, especially in time of trial and difficulty. They say, well, the Bible says the Lord won't give me more than he can handle. And, you know, I used to wonder about that because, you know, I've had experiences in my life where I've been overwhelmed, and you probably have too. Most people haven't. Obviously, some people have it even worse, and we hear their stories and our hearts ache for them. But that's a misrepresentation of that verse. God said he would never give us more than he and we can handle. The truth is that some of these great overwhelming things that happen in life, the loss of a child, the loss of a spouse, loss of a parent, loss of a job, a loss of our financial ruin, all these things can sink us and bring us to the point of despair. But we can handle it. But when we turn and lean into Christ, he can help us carry that burden. I had a funeral this day at noon, and one of the verses I read was Matthew 11:28, where I think it's Matthew 11:28, where he says, "Come unto me, all you who are carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Again, it points right back to this shepherd psalm. If you're feeling discouraged, and if you're feeling kind of a little lost, and maybe you're straying off the path, then what I want to do is just invite you today to turn to him and to invite him to lead you. If you're kind of off the path right now and you're doing things, or you're caught up in things that you know aren't godly or Christ-like, then maybe it's time, maybe it's an opportunity, maybe you're watching this today, and God is trying to say to you, okay, let's get on and let's get back on the path. I'll help you. You don't have to do it alone. I'll be with you, and I will show you the way, and that we'll be able to bring God glory together again. You see, that's what it's all about. Righteousness inside, saying, I want to please God, I want to honor God, I want to just let God have all the glory. And when we do that, we find that we're blessed too. And so I want to just close out with this. He wants you to do, and see where that will lead you. You know, Matt was talking in his video, and he talked about the fact that when we understand this, that God is calling us to be a part of His